So you might have noticed Donald Trump is making wild, almost delusional moves to reassert America's dominance in the world. In just the last few weeks, he's humiliated the Ukrainian president in a heated Oval Office meeting, cut off all US military aid to Ukraine, reignited trade wars with our closest partners, and for the most childish of reasons, renamed the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. He floated the idea of a US military takeover of Gaza, tried to strong-arm Denmark again into selling him Greenland, and is still demanding more US control over the Panama Canal. These are not the actions of a secure and confident superpower. These are the flailing gestures of a nation terrified that it's losing control, grasping at symbols of strength to cover up a deeper sense of decline. That fear of decline is precisely what brought Trump to power twice. And the bitter irony is that Trump, the man elected to stop the fall of America, is doing more than anyone else to make it happen. Every norm he shatters, every alliance he weakens, every institution he undermines, it's all making America weaker, more chaotic, and more isolated. Trump isn't reversing American decline, he's making it a reality. Trump's entire foreign policy agenda is based on the idea that for decades, America has been too generous, too selfless, too willing to let other countries walk all over us. That's the whole premise of America first, that we've been getting ripped off and now we need to take back what's ours. There's just one problem with that theory. It's not true. America has always put itself first. This country does almost nothing on the world stage purely out of goodwill or compassion. Every dollar of foreign aid, every military intervention, every international deal, there's always a strategic advantage behind it. Ukraine is a perfect example of this. America didn't just hand over nearly $400 billion of aid out of the kindness of its heart. No, that money was spent to cripple one of our biggest geopolitical adversaries, Russia, without having to send American troops into combat. A win-win for the United States. We get to weaken Russia militarily without losing American lives, and Ukraine gets to do all the fighting. Doesn't exactly sound like charity to me, but it is exactly how we fought the Cold War. For nearly 50 years, the US and Soviet Union treated entire regions of the world as chessboards, backing coups, funding insurgencies, and propping up brutal dictators just to make sure the other side didn't gain influence. Tens of millions of people died in proxy wars between American and Soviet-backed forces in Asia, Latin America, and Africa. America wasn't some benevolent global caretaker being taken advantage of. It was one of two imperial powers waging a war for control over the planet. Even today, most of America's foreign aid is a tool of soft power, designed to secure economic, military, and political leverage over the recipient nations. It's about influence, not generosity. So when Trump claims that America first is about ending an era of exploitation where the US got nothing in return for all of its supposed generosity, he's either lying or doesn't know history. Knowing Trump, it's probably a bit of both. The US has never been a sucker on the world stage. It has always been a dealer at the table, making sure the game is rigged in its favor. It wasn't just military strength or economic clout that made America the most powerful country on earth. It was the fact that America rewrote the rules of the world order to always keep itself on top. After World War II, the US didn't just conquer territory and declare itself the global ruler. Instead, it did something much smarter. It built a network of international institutions, economic agreements, and military alliances that locked in American dominance for generations. The United Nations put America at the heart of global diplomacy, ensuring it would always have a seat at the table when major world decisions were made. NATO turned Europe into a permanent American military protectorate, giving the US direct influence over the security of an entire continent. The World Bank and IMF helped shape global economic policies that always benefited American financial interests. The dollar became the global reserve currency, ensuring that international trade and finance always ran through US markets. America was playing the ultimate long game. We didn't need to physically conquer the world because we built a system where everybody already had to play by our rules. Of course, Trump doesn't get any of this since he's never opened a book in his life. To him, these alliances and institutions aren't tools of American dominance, they're scams. He genuinely believes NATO and the UN and global trade agreements are just a bunch of freeloaders tricking America into paying their bills. That's why he threatened to pull out of NATO and openly floated the idea of letting Russia do whatever it wants in Europe, launch trade wars with China, Europe, and even Canada. Yes, Canada, ignoring the fact that American companies benefit from these trade relationships. He cut funding to the UN and pulled out of the World Health Organization, acting as if abandoning global institutions would somehow strengthen America rather than isolate it. Past American leaders understood that American power isn't just about bombs and battleships. It's about buy-in. Despite its overwhelming military strength, the US has always known that the world is too big, too diverse, and too complicated to force everyone to comply with our demands through brute strength alone. Persuasion, cooperation, and economic leverage have always been just as important as military dominance in maintaining American supremacy. And Trump is in the process of destroying all of that. He's not reinforcing America's place at the center of the global order. He's dismantling the very systems that kept America in control for decades. If Trump has done anything remarkable in foreign policy, it's that he stripped American power of its moral pretenses. For decades, U.S. leaders have cloaked foreign interventions in the language of freedom, democracy, and human rights, pretending that America's global dominance is about benevolence rather than self-interest. But Trump, he doesn't bother with the act. He skips the hypocrisy and goes straight to the villainy. When past presidents supported brutal regimes, they at least felt the need to dress it up in noble rhetoric. Trump, however, openly praises dictators like Putin and Kim Jong-un, making it clear that America's alliances have nothing to do with human rights and everything to do with personal loyalty and raw power. Before, when the U.S. sent foreign aid, it was always framed as part of the moral duty to help struggling nations. But Trump made it explicitly transactional, tying aid to whether leaders personally flattered him or agreed to investigate his political enemies. In the past, when the U.S. engaged in military interventions, past presidents at least tried to justify them as necessary evils. But Trump, he just outright asked the military why he can't just steal other countries' oil. In these ways and others, Trump is simply saying what has always been true. American foreign policy has always been about American power. What makes him different is that he refuses to pretend otherwise. For decades, America has sold itself both to its citizens and to the world as the champion of democracy and human rights, while simultaneously toppling elected governments, propping up dictators, and waging wars that left entire regions in ruins. The Iraq War is a stain on America's national conscience that it has never fully reckoned with. It was sold as a fight for freedom, but it was an illegal, catastrophic, imperialist war of aggression waged on lies. And people haven't forgotten. That war permanently shattered America's credibility when it comes to preaching about democracy and human rights abroad. And that's exactly why when Russia invaded Ukraine and America loudly proclaimed the need to stand up for the sovereignty and freedom of the Ukrainian people, many people on both the far right and far left simply refused to buy it. It's no wonder that aggressive factions on both extremes have been easily co-opted into the propaganda war against Ukraine, seeing U.S. involvement as just another imperialist maneuver. Despite the morality of the war itself being crystal clear, Putin is the aggressor and Ukraine is the victim, America's track record abroad has made its words feel hollow. America has spent so long weaponizing the language of virtue to justify its worst atrocities that by the time Trump came along and attacked the very concept of virtue itself, he actually seemed more honest than the system he was fighting. For millions of Americans, Trump's raw, naked shamelessness, his utter disregard for decency, morality, or diplomatic pretense felt like a relief. At least he wasn't pretending, right? What Trump doesn't understand, what no empire in history has ever understood until it was too late, is that no nation can be great by refusing to care about anyone or anything beyond itself. The narrowness, the self-absorption, the pathological selfishness that Trump champions doesn't make a nation strong at all. It makes it small, it makes it petty, and ultimately, it makes it weak. No matter how powerful a nation is, or thinks it is dependent on other countries in ways both big and small. No country exists in a vacuum. And yet Trump's entire worldview is built on the fantasy of selfish isolation. The idea that America can simply cut itself off, walk away from alliances, wage economic war on its neighbors, and still maintain the same level of influence and prosperity. It's pure delusion. History is littered with once powerful empires that collapsed under the weight of their own arrogance, convinced that their dominance was permanent, that they didn't need anyone else, and that the world would continue to revolve around them, no matter how recklessly they behaved. Trump's America is following that exact script. By treating everyone, friends and enemies alike, as disposable, by shattering relationships that took generations to build, by reducing global politics to nothing more than transactional power plays, he's not making America great again. He's making it alone. And an empire that stands alone never stands for long. True greatness isn't about taking everything for yourself. It's about building something so strong, so stable, so enduring that it lasts beyond your own narrow self-interest. But Trump has never been capable of thinking beyond himself. So it's no surprise that his vision for America is equally self-absorbed, short-sighted, and ultimately self-destructive. The deeper truth is that if America wants to remain strong, it can't just go back to the way things were before Trump. Because Trump didn't create the rot in American foreign policy. He simply exposed it. He ripped off the mask, showing the world what has always been beneath the surface. A nation that has long talked about democracy while toppling democracies, that has preached human rights while backing brutal regimes, that has condemned imperialism while practicing it under different names. If America truly wants to remain on top, not just as a powerful country, but as a legitimate moral leader on the world stage, then the first thing we have to do is totally reconsider what being on top even means. The pursuit of empire, the belief that the world and the people in it exist solely for America's benefit, to be used, discarded, and reshaped at will, must be consigned to the dustbin of history. A country that treats global politics as a game of exploitation will always breed resentment. A country that talks about freedom abroad while crushing democracy at home will always lack credibility. A country that lectures the world about morality while committing its own moral atrocities will always find its power slipping away. If America truly cares about democracy, we need to start practicing it at home before demanding it abroad. If we care about human rights, we need to stop using them as a selective excuse for military intervention and show some genuine commitment to the humanity and dignity of all people. If we want respect, we need to lead with something other than coercion, war, and transactional self-interest. The hard truth is that America will never again dominate the world the way it once did. No nation will. The age of empires, of unchecked global hegemony, is over. No matter how much we want to turn back the clock, we can't. No matter what delusions our political leaders try and sell to the public, no matter how many wars we start, sanctions we impose, or threats we issue, the world has changed in ways that cannot be undone. For centuries, Western empires carved up the globe, treating the rest of humanity as an endless resource pool for their wealth, labor, and ambitions. That era of unchecked Western dominance is vanishing before our eyes. Trump and his movement refuse to accept this reality, so they sell a fantasy that America can somehow revive its imperial dominance through sheer force of will. That if we just tear up trade agreements, break alliances, and stand up to the globalists, we can go back to the days where America dictated the terms of world order and everyone else fell in line. That world no longer exists, and trying to resurrect it through reckless foreign policy, economic isolationism, or brute military force will not bring it back. It will only hasten America's decline by alienating allies, strengthening adversaries, and proving once again that empires collapse not from external threats, but from their own inability to evolve. America can either accept the reality of a world where it doesn't get its way all the time and find a way to thrive within it, or it can die chasing a past that is never coming back. Great powers don't collapse because they become weak. They collapse because they refuse to change. They cling to old delusions of dominance, believing that they are too mighty to fall until reality catches up. America right now is standing on that precipice. History has made one thing clear: no empire lasts forever. The only question now is whether America will survive beyond its empire or collapse with it.